The concept of peace often appears most vibrant when shadowed by warfare, yet its attainment rarely follows a direct route. As the conflict in Ukraine intensifies, assurances of rapid solutions, such as those voiced in Donald Trump's campaign, confront the severe realities of escalating combat and deeply rooted animosities. Airstrikes are increasing, casualty figures are soaring, and a clear path to resolution remains elusive. Therefore, the primary concern is not solely whether peace is feasible, but, more critically, at what ultimate expense. Today we will examine the intricate aspects of this war and why diplomatic efforts alone might not suffice. As the military conflict progresses, it appears to be growing more intense. The fighting has recently seen some of the most extensive air raids, increases in casualty counts on the Russian side, and no observable reduction in violence. Despite this, a prevailing optimism endures among some, with many believing the confrontation could still conclude swiftly. We aim to explore the viability of this optimism, assess possible results, and determine why diplomacy on its own won't conclude this conflict. It is important to remember that mere hope cannot bring this war to its end. The appeal of wishful thinking frequently encourages societies and leaders to pursue strategies that avoid immediate problems. However, historical experiences have shown this approach can lead to tragic outcomes. With regards to Ukraine, anticipating a quick peace or a settlement grounded purely on good intentions is risky, as it could repeat mistakes made in the past, while also dismissing fundamental issues driving the conflict. World War II provides a stark warning regarding the dangers of appeasement and misplaced hope. During the 1930s, Adolf Hitler started his expansionist policies by taking back previous German lands, actions initially dismissed as a minor readjustment by the international community. Desperate for peace, Western leaders opted not to challenge Germany, even as its ambitions became increasingly clear. This lack of action enabled Hitler to strengthen his army, solidify his territorial gains, and set the stage for one of history's deadliest conflicts. The cost of avoiding early confrontation was immense, resulting in over 85 million lives lost and unparalleled global destruction. The parallels with the events in Ukraine are quite sharp. Similar to how Hitler's Germany used nationalistic interests and old disputes to justify its expansions, Russia has framed its actions in Ukraine as an essential defense of its sovereignty and regional security. According to Russia's 2000 national security strategy, safeguarding their sovereignty and countering perceived Western interventionism are key parts of its core doctrine. This story has been weaponized to justify their aggression, portraying Ukraine's alignment with Western nations as a clear danger to the Russian identity and overall influence. Not only does this obfuscate Moscow's own imperial ambitions, but it also distorts historical grievances to justify military operations that openly violate international law. Each concession, from Crimea in 2014 to the Donbass shortly after, has emboldened Moscow, demonstrating that diplomacy without responsibility frequently makes way for greater conflict. Expecting that Russia will voluntarily retreat or respect peace agreements without external pressure is naive and completely ignores past lessons. Another layer of complexity is the effect of false information in shaping public opinion and delaying decisive action. During World War II, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels portrayed the war as a battle of European civilization against Jewish Bolshevism, alleging that by way of their terrible methods, the Jews had caused the Soviet Union to be in a miserable condition. Similar tactics are at play today. Russian propaganda has been spreading conspiracies, claiming that Western nations are dragging out the conflict for profit. This narrative distorts the fact of Russia's unprovoked invasion and weakens international solidarity against aggression. Such disinformation makes it difficult for global leaders and citizens to agree on a clear course of action. Invading forces depend on division, using propaganda to weaken resistance and delay any effective response. Identifying and countering these tactics is critical to preventing further escalation. The lure of peace is understandable, particularly in the face of rising casualties and widespread destruction. However, a peace agreement that fails to address the root causes of war will only give us temporary relief. Russia interprets the Budapest Memorandum and the Minsk agreements selectively to suit its geopolitical aims. The memorandum's promises to uphold Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity have been ignored by Russian operations in Crimea and the Donbass, highlighting Moscow's willingness to use such agreements for strategic advantage. Wishful thinking cannot replace a proper understanding of the stakes in Ukraine. History teaches us that appeasement and a lack of action embolden aggressors, while misinformation creates confusion that delays any appropriate reaction. To avoid the errors of the past, the global community must recognize that lasting peace demands confronting these difficult facts and committing to the hard choices necessary to uphold sovereignty and justice. Anything less risks continuing the cycle of conflict and destroying the stability of the international structure. Is diplomacy destined for failure in Ukraine? Diplomacy, although often viewed as the ultimate answer to resolving disputes, is unlikely to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. At the heart of this conflict lies not merely a territorial dispute, but a fundamental battle over sovereignty, identity, and geopolitical alignment. This basic clash makes it almost impossible for diplomacy to achieve a permanent peace on its own. Here are the key reasons why. Unlike conflicts where compromises can resolve problems, the war in Ukraine is deeply rooted in objectives that cannot be reconciled. For Russia, the objective is to dominate Ukraine politically, economically, and culturally, while also stopping its integration with Western organizations like NATO and the European Union. This vision requires Ukraine's total submission, either by installing a pro-Russian regime or by outright territorial annexation. In comparison, Ukraine's primary objective is to defend its sovereignty and to regain control over all of its territory, which includes Crimea and the eastern regions now occupied by Russian-backed separatists. These dramatically opposing goals leave little room for talks or any mutual concessions. Russia's history of breaking agreements with Ukraine further undermines the credibility of any possible diplomatic solution. The 1994 Budapest Memorandum, Russia's annexation of Crimea, and secret invasion of eastern Ukraine brings uncomfortable attention to the value of the security assurances that were given to Ukraine by the nuclear powers in exchange for its denuclearization. Similarly, the Minsk agreements, which aimed to lessen the fighting in eastern Ukraine, were regularly broken by Moscow as it continued to back separatist forces and increase hostilities. These constant violations of trust demonstrate that Russia views diplomacy as a way to extract concessions and gain time instead of a pathway to lasting peace. Even if a new agreement was reached, there is little reason to suggest that Moscow would honor it once it became strategically beneficial to break it. For Russia, diplomacy frequently acts as a tactical delay rather than a solution. By engaging in peace talks, Moscow can project an image of willingness to negotiate while also regrouping its forces and consolidating gains on the ground. This tactic was obvious during the Minsk process, where ceasefires were used to consolidate territories held by separatists in Donbass. Such methods allow Russia to strengthen its position and prepare for renewed offensives, weakening the core goals of diplomacy. A peace settlement reached under current conditions would likely favor Russia, given its territorial gains and military presence in occupied areas. Such an agreement could freeze the conflict rather than resolve it, leaving Ukraine with major territorial losses and a limited capability to govern properly. In addition, it would embolden Russia to pursue similar methods in other neighboring nations, further destabilizing the region. A premature peace could also undermine Ukraine's sovereignty by legitimizing Russian control over occupied territories. This result would send a dangerous message to authoritarian regimes across the globe that aggression and territorial conquest can be rewarded through diplomatic means. It would also demoralize Ukraine's allies, weakening the global dedication to upholding international norms. Another significant barrier to effective diplomacy is the uneven power dynamic between the negotiating parties. Russia's nuclear arsenal and global influence give it significant power in any talks, allowing it to pressure Ukraine into accepting unfavorable terms. Meanwhile, Ukraine depends greatly on support from Western allies, whose commitment to a long war might waver over time. This imbalance results in a situation where any diplomatic resolution risks favoring Russia, decreasing Ukraine's ability to achieve a just and lasting peace. Diplomacy cannot conclude the war in Ukraine because it fails to solve the main issues causing the conflict. These include Russia's imperial ambitions and Ukraine's fight for its sovereignty. Given Russia's record of broken agreements, its tactical misuse of negotiations and irreconcilable objectives, any diplomatic attempt risks becoming only a temporary break rather than a permanent solution. Lasting peace will only be feasible when the underlying power dynamics shift considerably. This could be through Ukraine's victory, an internal transformation of Russia, or ongoing global pressure that causes Moscow to abandon its expansionist ambitions. Inside Putin's mindset, what drives his war? Understanding Vladimir Putin's psychological drivers is vital to comprehending the broader dynamics of the Ukraine war. As with many authoritarian leaders, Putin's actions are deeply rooted in insecurity, a relentless pursuit of power, and a longing for historical legacy. These factors drive his strategic decisions, making him an unpredictable and hazardous adversary. At the heart of Putin's psychology lies a deep fear of losing power. Like other dictators throughout history, his main priority is regime survival. This paranoia is intensified by his understanding of how previous Russian leaders have been overthrown or murdered when they lost their grip on power. Therefore, Putin's policies frequently prioritize short-term control over long-term stability, leading to risky geopolitical gambles. Putin's insecurity is not just personal, but also institutional. He sees any challenge to his authority, from internal protests, Western sanctions, or Ukrainian resistance, as an existential threat. This mentality explains his aggressive suppression of domestic opposition and his portrayal of the West as an enemy conspiring to weaken Russia. By presenting himself as the defender of Russian sovereignty, Putin seeks to consolidate power and rally nationalistic support. Another significant motivator for Putin is his ambition to leave a lasting historical legacy. He views himself as a modern czar, restoring Russia's status as a global superpower and reversing the perceived humiliation of the Soviet Union's collapse. This desire is obvious in his frequent references to Russian history and his portrayal of the Ukraine war as part of a wider struggle to reclaim Russia's rightful sphere of influence. Putin's territorial ambitions in Ukraine exemplify this view. He sees Ukraine not as a sovereign nation, but as a wayward territory, essential to Russia's identity and security. His revisionism of history, for example, his denial of Ukraine's distinct cultural and political heritage, offers justification for military aggression. This view leaves little room for negotiation or compromise, as any concession would be seen as a betrayal of his imperial ambitions. United States intelligence assessments have frequently highlighted Putin's skill as a manipulator. He is described as someone who lies without hesitation and exploits the naivety of his adversaries. Western leaders have frequently miscalculated his intentions, assuming he operates within the same moral and strategic frameworks as democratic counterparts. This miscalculation has allowed Putin to take advantage of diplomatic channels, using negotiations as opportunities to regroup and strengthen his position. For Putin, deception is not merely a tactic, but a cornerstone of his leadership style. He has continuously misled both his domestic audience and the international community, from denying involvement in Crimea's annexation to spreading misinformation about the war in Ukraine. Putin weaponizes confusion to weaken resistance and maintain control. Putin's psychology bears striking similarities to other authoritarian leaders such as Napoleon or Stalin. Like them, he is driven by a combination of ambition and paranoia, alternating between calculated strategy and impulsive aggression. His refusal to accept defeat echoes Napoleon's endless campaigns, even after experiencing major losses. This high-risk attitude makes him a particularly dangerous figure, as he is unlikely to back down without a clear victory or complete defeat. Putin's psychological profile suggests that he views the Ukraine war as a personal and existential battle. Any diplomatic resolution that leaves his objectives unfulfilled would likely be seen as a loss, weakening his regime's legitimacy and his place in history. This explains his willingness to endure massive casualties and economic hardships, as the stakes for him extend beyond Ukraine to his own survival. Moreover, his inability to tolerate any perceived weakness makes him resistant to compromise. Even if a temporary ceasefire were achieved, it would likely be a tactical pause for Putin to regroup and prepare for further aggression. Understanding this mindset is vital for the international community, as it highlights the need for a solid and united response to deter any further escalation. In conclusion, Vladimir Putin's psychology is shaped by a complex interplay of insecurity, ambition, and manipulation. His actions in Ukraine reflect not just geopolitical strategy, but deeply personal motivations. To effectively address the conflict, the global community must account for these psychological factors and prepare for the long-term challenges they pose. 3 possible scenarios that could end the Ukraine war. The war in Ukraine signifies a clash of irreconcilable goals. Russia's goal to subjugate Ukraine, and Ukraine's fight for its sovereignty. As long as these opposing objectives continue, the conflict will persist. However, there are 3 possible results that could conclude this war. Outcome 1. A Russian victory. A Russian victory would involve Ukraine's military collapse and the establishment of a pro-Russian regime, aligning with Moscow's long-term goal of control over Ukraine. This would require full occupation, suppression of resistance, and the installation of a puppet government. However, this scenario is increasingly unlikely because of significant setbacks for Russia. These include logistical failures, equipment shortages, and over 600,000 Russian casualties since the war began in 2022. Ukraine's resilience, supported by Western intelligence and advanced weaponry, has further prevented Moscow from achieving its goals. While theoretically possible, a Russian victory would come at an extraordinary cost in lives, resources, and international reputation. Outcome 2. A Ukrainian victory. A Ukrainian victory would mean the expulsion of Russian forces from all occupied territories, including Crimea and the Donbass region, restoring Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. This result would also reinforce international law and democratic resilience. However, it relies on continued Western support as Ukraine faces entrenched Russian defenses and the possibility of escalatory measures such as tactical nuclear strikes. Military successes like the defense of Kyiv and counteroffensives in Kharkiv and Kherson show Ukraine's capability, but ongoing military, economic, and humanitarian aid is critical to achieving total victory. Outcome 3. The collapse of Putin's regime. The third outcome involves a transformative change in Russia's leadership. The collapse of Vladimir Putin's regime, whether because of internal dissent, economic collapse, or political upheaval, could lead to a resolution. A new government, focused on domestic recovery rather than imperial ambitions, might end the war and reset relations with the international community. Reports indicate increasing dissatisfaction within the military and political elites regarding the Kremlin's handling of the war. This discontent is a result of miscalculations and bad forecasts, leading to a costly war that few among Putin's elites had likely anticipated. Sanctions have severely weakened Russia's economy, amplifying internal pressures. Historical precedents, such as the Soviet Union's 1991 collapse, show how rapidly such shifts can occur, although the aftermath remains uncertain. Each outcome has global implications. A Russian victory would embolden authoritarian regimes, while a Ukrainian victory would set a standard for resisting aggression. The collapse of Putin's regime could provide a path to peace, but also risks destabilizing Russia and its borders. The world's response will shape not just the future of Ukraine, but also the stability of the international order. Can the world change the course of Ukraine's war? The global community plays a key role in shaping the trajectory of the Ukraine war, influencing immediate outcomes and the long-term stability of the region and international order. As the conflict intensifies, a strategic, unified approach is important to handle the stakes effectively. One of the main challenges for Ukraine's allies is balancing strong support for Ukraine with minimizing risks of escalation. While significant military aid, economic assistance, and diplomatic support has been provided, fears of provoking Russia, including potential nuclear retaliation, often temper this support. Historical examples show that cautious, half measures only lengthen conflicts, increasing both human and economic costs. A decisive commitment to Ukraine's victory, both militarily and diplomatically, is important for a just and lasting peace. Unity among global powers is paramount. Divisions within NATO, The EU or other alliances could embolden Russia by signaling weakness. A fragmented approach risks undermining sanctions and collective actions. To counter this, clear and coordinated policies are vital to demonstrate unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty. Sanctions remain a powerful tool, but must be airtight to close loopholes allowing Russian energy and goods to bypass restrictions. Efforts to curb Russia's evasion tactics by using intermediary nations are critical. Additionally, investments in renewable energy and diversified energy supplies will lessen global reliance on Russian fossil fuels, further weakening Moscow's economic leverage. The war has created a severe humanitarian crisis, displacing millions and devastating Ukraine's infrastructure. Immediate aid must be combined with long-term commitments to rebuild Ukraine's economy and hold Russia accountable for violating international law. Ensuring justice by prosecuting war crimes sends a strong message that aggression will not go unpunished, deterring future conflicts. Propaganda and disinformation campaigns by Russia further complicate efforts, eroding global unity. The international community must counter misinformation by promoting factual reporting and supporting independent journalism, ensuring accurate narratives reach global audiences. Ultimately, the global response must transcend piecemeal efforts, addressing both the urgent and structural challenges of the conflict. A decisive, unified strategy can pave the way for lasting peace, ensuring that aggression is not rewarded and setting a precedent for international justice and stability. The challenges in Ukraine remind us that peace is not just a goal, it is a responsibility. As we navigate these complex issues, let's strive for a future where conflicts are resolved through unity, respect, and mutual understanding. Your voice matters in shaping that future. So, if this video resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and help foster a meaningful discussion. This channel's content is intended for informational and educational purposes only. While we strive to provide balanced analyses on political and military topics, the views expressed do not reflect those of any government organization or political entity. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth explorations of the stories shaping our world. And before you go, check out the video on your screen to uncover how historical patterns influence today's conflicts. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay informed and inspired. Before we delve deeper, I want to highlight that there's been a multitude of significant global events recently, each demanding our attention. Let's explore these happenings together. Now, before moving forward, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and that you've given this video a thumbs up. Your interaction is very important to our channel's progress. Also, why don't you let us know in the comment section where you are watching from? This will help us understand our audience better. Also, make sure you watch this until the very end, as we will be drawing some significant conclusions at the close of this video.